Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Dark Matter as well as the latest episode of Wynonna Earp. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Dark Matter, you can skip to what I have to say about this week's episode of Wynonna Earp. But the first thing I want to talk about is this week's episode of Dark Matter. Such a good episode. Hands down, probably easily one of my favorite episodes. This episode was so cool and so much fun. Literally, the basic premise being like, oh, the team ended up going back in time. Did not see that storyline coming. But to be fair, it's once again like one of those things where it's like, things are a little, weird things happen to the Raza. They did go to a parallel universe. So it's not like time traveling wouldn't be like that out of the picture. But for them, they go back 600 years, so they land basically in the 21st century. And so basically, they have to adopt like fake identities and stuff and try to fit in with Earth, because basically they end up finding out that, hey, there's another blank drive here, because basically that's the only place they can be right now, because none of the other systems that are in place in their present day are there right now to support them. So it's like Earth's the only place they have to go. There's actually this interesting look where you had like a look between 5 and 2, because we do know that, I mean, it never came up in the episode, but I'm thinking that's what crossed 2's mind is to a certain extent. It's like, the fact is that she has a connection to Earth, like, whether or not she was actually like made on Earth, but the fact of the matter is, like, there was that tower that, thing on Earth, like, she was like, oh yeah, like she has her own connection to Earth. So I was wondering if that was what that was going to be about, but it never came up during the episode. I just thought that was kind of interesting. But, I just love them all trying to fit in, playing like, I love like, it's like, oh, you're playing certain archetypes. Like 2 is playing the soccer mom, and 5 is playing a goth kid, and 6 is the salaryman, and 3 is the slob. I love it. Calling them archetypes like they're playing characters from like a video game or a TV show or something like that. I just thought that was so good, and them just trying to fit in and everything. Trying to be a normal fan. It's so weird because you're so used to the show being one way, and then seeing them in modern day, even they're like, this is weird. It's like living in a museum. It's so out of character, and that's what makes me love this episode so much, because it was so weird and different. I mean, luckily for them, they didn't really have to deal with the whole, like, oh, being the most wanted criminals in space and people constantly after them. It's like, oh, we could take some time to just relax and breathe. Obviously, we're here for our own particular reasons. Like, we never really got 100% of a look at how everyone felt about it. Obviously, 3 is kind of like, let's get the hell out of here as soon as possible. But mainly that's because of the whole Sarah situation, because they were setting it up to be like, we don't know how long we're going to be here, so we might as well get a house and everything together. And it's just like, 2's the mom, and her husband is 3. Her brother-in-law is 6. Her daughter is 5, and the android is her sister, just like called Rihanna. Ariana. It was just so good all around. But but getting back to it, like 3 struggling with the whole Sarah situation, because it puts things in perspective, because it's like, oh, like you might be down there. Like basically Sarah's like, this can't last forever. We're trying to hold on to something that can't last. I need something real, and so do you. Who's to say you won't be down there long enough that you'll end up finding someone, and it might be something there, something more real that someone you can start a life with. And Sarah, he's trying to tell Sarah, it's like, no, you're real, but she's like, it's not enough. Like, I don't want you to kind of have to come and visit me out of pity. It's like, I want you, because at the end of the day, she wants him to be happy, but she also deserves to be happy too. So it's a situation of like, it's a very complicated situation. So I've mentioned in the past, I've been very kind of like pessimistic about the whole situation. I'm like, I'm still waiting for the twist to be like, she goes like full blown like psycho program and ends up, trying to kill him to keep him with her forever. I don't know if that would be the case or not. I do kind of tend to like believe something wholeheartedly, and it turns out like that's not the case at all. But so once again, I was completely wrong about the whole android situation, so I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. But like, you do understand her struggle, because it's like, oh yeah, this world is awesome and everything, but it's not real. This is all I am. I'm just a program now. It's like, I'm not even really Sarah. I am Sarah, but it's like, not to the extent that I was before. It's basically essentially an existential crisis type of situation. So that was where it left off for them. Whether or not there'll be more of that in the future, I would think so. But it's kind of an interesting thing because she brought up the whole like, oh, you meet someone else. To me, immediately they play that up a little bit to a certain extent in the episode when he's hanging around too. Obviously, them pretending to be husband and wife. Nothing really happens much of it, but they spending time together. And it's so cute seeing like two all happy. And she's like, oh, playing with the dog and everything. And she looks up at 3. She has like the most like adorable look on her face. And he's like, we can't get a dog. It's like, what about this whole time, paradox thing? She's like, it could be a morale boost for the crew. And even 3 kind of comments, he's like, it's actually the happiest he's seen her in a very long time. Granted, considering all they've been through, it's not really, it is interesting because you never really get to see 2 like that often. She has to kind of be in serious mode, but he wanted reminders like, hey, we make decisions together. It's not just on you. Like the decision, the weight of like this whole crew isn't all on you. We make this decision together. Like, don't feel like you have to handle things on your own. So that was kind of a beautiful thing. But also, like, it made me think about what Sarah was saying. It's like, we know 3 and 2 kind of hit it off a little bit back in season 1, but it was kind of more of a fling thing. But then the truth came out about her, and then he kind of kept her at a distance. But, and then it mainly became a her and one thing. So, I don't know. I'm curious whether that will become a thing or not. And if it does, that might turn, I don't know, because like there was that whole thing about Sarah and 2, like she's like, 2's like, oh yeah, it's kind of messed up. You've been here, you're part of this crew too, and I haven't come to visit you. I just kind of feel like that might be set up for like, oh, if something does happen between 2 and 3, maybe we'll go like, oh, jealous programming type of situation. Once again, that's me kind of not giving her the benefit of the doubt. I'm supposed to be giving her the benefit of the doubt. It was just kind of an interesting thing. I just love the whole situation. Them trying to fit in, especially the android. She ended up spoiling a TV show. They're like, she's just like, oh yeah, the finale was this. They're like, the finale hasn't aired yet. And she's like, oh, just trying to make casual conversation. Also, quick note, I didn't make note of it last episode. I didn't really notice it until this episode. But obviously, like, yes, last week's episode, 5 ended up doing her hair, and it looks super cute. It's just like, changing things up a little bit. And I also appreciate the android being like, because like 6 is like, oh yeah, you could stay up. Shouldn't you stay up here? Because it turns out her upgrade chip is actually kind of malfunctioning right now. But she's like, but 6 is like, shouldn't you really stay up here? And she's like, no, I'll be indispensable. But he's like, but she's like, indispensable. It's like, I really appreciate, because it seemed like more so than anyone, the android wanted to live this life more so than anyone else. She's the one that kept pushing for things. It's like, oh, we should, mingle and everything. It's for the mission. I think there's a part of her, she always tries to kind of connect with humans. And I think she thought this would probably be good. Like, I think on some level, she probably knew it was going to be good for the crew to kind of have, enjoy that kind of time away. Granted, they're kind of in a dire situation and need to get back to their own time and everything, but it's very fascinating. I also appreciate the angle of like the kids that are super suspicious, like, oh, who are they? Oh, are they like government agents? Oh no, they got a spaceship, they're aliens. And then the cops and then possibly the feds, which it doesn't get that far, but that whole situation kind of gets involved in everything. Jake ends up hanging out with 5 because he thinks she's like the coolest. It's like, and she's like super good at video games. He's like, how did you do that? Isn't that controller messed up? She's like, oh yeah, I fixed it. It's like, how? I don't know, I'm good with electronics. And then like, have you ever played this game before? No, first time. It's like, you're super good at it. Just, and even his friends are like, yo, dude, what the hell are you doing? She's an alien. Yeah, but she's a pretty cool alien. I also appreciate the conversation later on. And he's like, take me with you. She's like, well, obviously she explained the whole situation of being from a different time and not necessarily aliens. Don't know if that really is much of a distinction in the future. Because technically you're still aliens to them, I guess. But nevertheless, it was just kind of interesting in him being like, take me with you. She's like, no, I can't. He's like, I think I love you. And she's like, there's like 5 years difference between. It's like, what? So what? My Uncle Bill's dating a woman that's like 25 years younger, dude. And Five's like, oh, good for your Uncle Bill. Just that whole conversation. It's like, yeah, but you'll find someone, who's closer to you in this sense. Maybe someone that's a lot closer. And looks at his female friend. He's like, ew, gross. That's my cousin. She's like, oh, sorry. Well, somebody, and it's just like, it was so cool and kick-ass. I just thought that was just a beautiful moment, because it's one of those situations like, oh, there's someone a lot closer to you, like, oh, there's someone that you might not have noticed who might be a lot closer to you and everything. I was like, oh, he's just gonna be, I was wondering what he was gonna say. I was like, oh no, we're just friends. Or I thought the girl might be like ill, or he might be ill. He did go ill because that's my cousin. I wasn't expecting that being like, that's my cousin. I wasn't expecting that line, so it completely caught me off guard. It's just kind of like one of those typical moments that kind of took an interesting turn. It's like you were like, yeah, it's gonna be one of those things like, oh, be with her because she's nearby, she's your friend and everything. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. I just thought that was kind of well executed. But what was also interesting about this episode too is that they met the guy who actually created the blink drive. He went back in time and everything because the whole situation of like he didn't want corporations to get their hands on it, and he knew if he stayed, either he'd get killed or it'd be mass produced. Basically, the same reason why like the Raza has kept the blink drive as long as they have, because they don't want anyone else getting their hands on it. So basically, he came back in time. He left the blink drive, but he activated kind of a recall feature. The reason why because it wasn't even like they activated. Apparently, the blink drive had activated by itself and sent them on this time travel. But it seems like it was because of the recall program. It was basically programmed to follow him in the past. Because basically, he recreated a new one, hence the new blink drive. And what was the question, though, it then becomes, why only now? And later on, certain events kind of make it seem like it's understandable why, to a certain extent, because we end up finding out that later on the boy they met, Jake, the one that had a crush on Five, because of his experience with them, his granddaughter eventually was the one who created FTL. So it's like, wait a minute, we changed time to a certain extent, or maybe it turns into a whole, like, you know, the circle of time travel and everything. Like, we were always supposed to go back in time, so we inspire FTO to eventually be created. So we were always, that was always meant to happen. That wasn't an accident. So maybe the whole being recalled situation at that point in time was meant to be, I don't know, maybe just something else. Maybe the blink drop being, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't calibrated right at the time, because I mean, I doubt it had really been used a lot. So maybe because it wasn't fully calibrated, you know, I don't know. Or like maybe it's a whole space-time continuum of like it needed to be at that exact moment before it initiated. I don't know. That was just very interesting. I do appreciate that Five ended up walking away with a video game system that we see her and Two kind of playing and everything. Kind of, I guess, kind of getting what, you know, what Two wanted, kind of more of a morale boost. But I just thought that was kind of interesting. Interestingly enough, the professor did stay behind. I'm curious, does anything come about that? I mean, he's kind of got his feel of the future. It's not like the future's all right good right now anyway. But it's still kind of interesting of like, did he know that was going to happen or something, or what? I mean, because he does have like a little watch, like a smaller, like, well, I don't think he can like time travel anymore. I mean, granted, he is the one who created blink drive, but there's no technology probably in present day which would allow him to recreate one. So, but it does put the crew in an interesting position of having a new blink drive, but they like disengage it because it's like, yeah, we don't want to take the chance the professor might change his mind, try to recall it. So we'll only use it as a last measure, which you have Rio thinking it's still broken. So I'm very interested to see where anything will come of that. It's like, man, the blink drive can time travel and it can cross, go anywhere in the blink of an eye, and it can also like travel to alternate dimensions and stuff like that. Makes you wonder what other kind of shenanigans would they kind of get mixed up in. Two big points kind of also get brought up this episode. Small points are going to play a big role going forward. One being Rio gets contacted by Neiman, who's, you know, accompanied by Portia and Marcus. So that turns into a whole conversation of like, okay, they're going to be working together again. So for what purpose? Like, I wonder, like, because they're stuck in this universe too. I mean, obviously they can make a killing off of like, you know, knowing what they know and using it to their advantage. I mean, they're still kind of the evil Razas, so it kind of, you know, but it makes you wonder, like, what would they do? Would they ever be interested in going back to their world? So that might incentivize them to go after the Raza, even if the blink drive isn't necessarily working. Maybe they could get it working again. To go back to their own world, or maybe it's just to keep it to do what they want to. I mean, especially if they're joining up with Rio, who won't, like, Rio already established it last episode. He's not stopping till he takes them down. So that also begs the question, like, what? I mean, I'm curious what Neiman wants from Rio, because Rio's probably going to end up trusting them, but he should know that I guess he feels like he can trust them because it's like these are the versions of his crew that Rio knew, not, you know, four. So I don't know. I'm curious about that whole situation of like what will really come of that, like what their angle is. I mean, Neiman's going to help him in any shape or form, probably give Zyron his backing. for some help, and I would assume it's either crushing like any independent column, which there was a whole like them joining that whole thing last episode. So it's like I don't know, like, you know, Neiman wanted them kind of, you know, Ferris Corp in general wanted them dealt with. So I'm just curious, like, what will they be able to, I mean, I'm sure they'd offer Ashita like their backing, and which even then it's like, can you really trust them after what they pulled last season? You see what they kind of do just to kind of get their way. So who's to say they won't do the same to you? But I don't know. Ashita, like, Rio acts like he's got this in the bag, but then he could just as easily kind of get the rug swept up from underneath him. I mean, granted, we never actually got to meet or get to know the Rio of the other timeline, like of the other reality, because we know that Ishida will, like, the Ishida family will fall. We do know that, but we don't know. I mean, maybe that's, you know, once again, the time, like, it's already different in the other reality. So maybe they might, I mean, obviously they have somewhat future knowledge, so obviously they can be a big help and everything. I mean, once again, to a certain extent, you know. So I'm just curious to see how that all like will play out for him. But the other big thing is the whole situation with the android, where she is contacted by Victor. I don't know why. Like, every time I see that dude, I always think Vincent. His name's Victor, but I always think, I think I probably called it a, I spit a lot when I say that. I apologize. I think maybe in the past I've called him Vincent, so that's why it always stuck. I always know it's something with a V, but it's Victor. He ends up contacting Android. He's like, oh, I need your help. Not sure what the whole circumstances will be, but we do know some future events. We do know that Android kind of gets captured and almost dissected because she works with the whole, like, oh, Android kind of uprising, which I'm assuming Victor's part of. So that might be where her story is taking us next episode, leading to that event we've already seen. So, which is, it adds another layer to this whole situation now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, because the android did a whole time traveling thing. And it's like, no, that wasn't a one-off thing. It's like, now that the FTL is there, I mean, not the FTL, they have the blank drive, like, time travel is a more accurate, like, they would be able to do it a lot more easily. I mean, granted, they wouldn't want to do it anyway because their whole, like, concerns of paradox, and it's like, oh yeah, paradoxes, we could end up ceasing to be exist. But I mean, that when they were talking about professors, it's like, oh yeah, no, there's no chance of that. What's most likely going to happen is if we create a paradox, there's a good chance that we might end up creating like a ripple in time and space, which would basically lead to this entire place exploding, so, and taking down like 100 square miles or whatever, you know. So big boom is essentially. So it's probably not something they're really going to tackle with it. There's just, you know, like I said, I think two had the right idea of being like, let's disengage it. Only use it when we're 100% in need. Like, it has to be a last resort, you know? Like I said, a very, very good episode, and I'm super excited to see what the next episode has in store for us, especially with the whole Rio and Ferris situation, plus Android and Victor. So I think we are closing in on to that point where it does seem like there is a point, because it seems like, you know, Victor already kind of like foreshadowed it a bit by saying like, oh yeah, eventually your crew won't trust you anymore or something like that. So I get the feeling that this will definitely be a point where the android would have to choose between other androids and, you know, free will and everything, as well as her crew. So it's definitely going to be interesting going forward. And now moving on to this week's episode of Wynonna Earp, a very, very good episode of Wynonna Earp. Seems like, obviously keeping up with dark matter, we're having a time travel theme going down in this week's episodes. But this episode, I mean, it's more of a vision quest than anything, but basically Wynonna kind of went back in time because Juan Carlos set up this whole situation because she needed answers, but he couldn't, like, it does seem, we did learn from Juan Carlo this episode that it was, in fact, like, he is limited. He was kind of gained immortality to a certain extent, but he's meant to be an observer to watch over, but never interfere. So he literally can't tell them the answers they want or really help them. He could indirectly, sure, but directly helping them would be consequences, which for him, it's not an issue because he was already dying anyway because the widows had attacked him. They end up basically chewing into him later on in the episode. Dawes put a bullet in him, just kind of put him out of his misery so he wouldn't die slowly. Granted, whether he's dead, I don't know. There's always a chance they'll bring him back. I mean, we don't know who, I mean, still, we don't know what greater power made him the way he is. Because we did find out that he was just a normal human at one point in time. He was like a father / priest. So, a holy man, just to kind of put it in that terms. So He was just a regular dude at one point in time before like he gained his situation. Granted, who made him like that? Who it is that he kind of really serves, what greater power kind of put him in this position, we still don't know, but I guess that'd be something we're gonna learn earlier on. But it was a really good like vision quest that Wynonna went on, because she really got to learn a lot more about the past and a lot more about the curse and everything, because she ended up meeting Bobo, Constance, and Juan Carlo, because apparently all three of them worked together to seal the widows up in the first place, because he'd even said it earlier in the episode. He's like, I'm the one to I thought I sealed you away in a box. It's like, oh, okay, so he was the one but not alone, together with those two, he was able to seal them away. Constance did this because they're connected to Clutie, her husband, who Wyatt put down, which kind of set this whole curse thing in motion. But it's also around the time she lost her children. So that's why this whole, obviously, the whole reason why the whole Doc situation happened was because that was her way of hurting him, hurting Wyatt by taking away the person he cared about most, his best friend. Well, I mean, diving deeper into this whole situation, I think, like, the timeline's a little different, but it's like, as we see Doc is a little sick, which Doc kind of responds to, like, he's always been sick since he was 14, which is kind of pretty rough, but I mean, considering the time and everything, kind of makes sense. It's actually surprised that Doc's lived as long as he has, but it was a situation where he was kind of on the outs with Wyatt, because Wyatt sent Bobo, or rather Robert, to go send him a message like, hey, we can ride again, save Purgatory, which Doc is like, forget Purgatory, it's not worth saving. And he's like, if Wyatt wants to come tell me something, he can tell me himself. So this is around the time where he created that distance, because it's like, I'm sick and I'm dying, and we like, what's the point? I'm a dead man walking, essentially. So I'm assuming it's a combination of, at some point during that episode was when he made the deal with Constance to get the immortality, which then further broke him and Doc apart. But eventually we end up finding out later on the episode Wyatt went looking for Doc. He was actually concerned and couldn't find him. So there was some part of him still being like, no, I gotta find my best friend. It's actually kind of, I mean, this episode kind of made you actually feel very sympathetic for Bobo, because it kind of put things in perspective for you that Bobo was kind of, in a sense, he was almost a new Doc for Wyatt, because him and Wyatt were such good friends. They kind of worked together and everything. And so he was actually a good man, you know, a little jealous and everything, because no matter what he did, like, the most important friend and person to Wyatt would always be Doc. The Doc would be more important. It's like, oh, I'm standing here, I'm here to help you, I'm your friend, but all you see is Doc. Once again, like, in a mess up sense, that's all he was. He was kind of Doc's replacement, and Wyatt was probably so caught up that he didn't ever really notice. So, but the reason why Bobo got cursed in the first place is because to take down Clutie, who had him captured, he had told Wyatt, take the shot. The bullet went through Bobo and hit Clutie, but because it still went through him and that wound is what eventually killed him, that led to him dying. And anyone killed by Peacemaker will come back as a revenant. So he ended up dying. That, I mean, it's messed up. Because, I mean, even Wynonna was like, why do you hate the Earp so much? How did you become a demon? Like, you and Wyatt were such good friends. So, like, obviously, like, if he was a revenant, like, he's a revenant, meaning at some point Wyatt put him down, but it's like, it's not like Wyatt did it on purpose. It was just kind of circumstances. Like, Robert kind of gave him the go ahead, but I mean, at the time he didn't really know about what that meant. And it was like, I didn't even think about what that meant. I was like, man, that sucks, dude, trying to do the right thing. He legitimately was a good man, but then Constant, like, kind of teases him. It's like, yeah, but still, hell will kind of burn that out of you. And we also see the makings of, like, the beginning deals of, like, hey, you help me find the bones of my children, I'll help you fight this whole situation, which Robert wasn't willing to, but then he kind of did, but then kind of backed out again. Like, he could have helped Doc get out the well, but it's just because of the jealousy, you know, because the fact is Doc wasn't willing to give up his ring because the ring was tied to his immortality, which is understandable because the Doc we knew then is very different from the Doc that is now. If it meant, you know, I don't know, because it's hard to say, because this is Doc after he just got, you know, better. He wasn't, like, a death sentence wasn't, you know, looming over his head anymore. Of course he wasn't willing to give that up. Like I said, like, with the time, they never really show you the time frame, but you can only assume he's only been, like, well and okay such a short amount of time. So it's like, no, like for the first time in his life, he doesn't have to worry about death. He can be strong, continue being the man he wants to be in a sense. So it's not easy to kind of give that up, but but even later on, Robert kind of admits he did act out of jealousy. So he ended up letting, he didn't bother helping Doc at all because all he wanted was the ring because the ring would have helped him too much like it helped Doc. So inadvertently dooming them both. Because even Wynonna says it later on, it's like if he had helped Doc, all of this could have been avoided. Who's to say, like, Robert could have been a good man, not ever becoming a revenant. Doc wouldn't have kind of been stuck in a situation of living as long as he did, being trapped in that well for as long as he was, for such a long time. So, but like I said, it still makes you feel bad for Robert considering the circumstances. We also kind of saw the continuing making of the deal because for them, it's like, at that point, Robert's like, well, there's no dealings between us because you don't have anything I want. She's like, oh, I'll find something. And we know now, because of the series, we know that thing was eventually Willa, his lead, his way of getting out of the ghost triangle, kind of escaping his curse. So, but what I found the most fascinating about the circumstances too is the fact is that there was that moment where Bobo at the end of his life could see Wynonna, even though this wasn't real, even though, it was more like a ghost trip, but it still had like, I guess in some way, even though it was like a vision quest, she still time traveled. And I guess maybe because their destiny, I think maybe it's a combination of the fact is that the destinies are so connected, or the fact is that she was on the verge of death herself, so that bridge between them kind of closed to the point he could see her and he was like, oh, you're my guardian angel. And then she was telling him basically, no matter what happens, never forget the man that you were. And she's basically, he was like, okay, you're my angel and you're dying because of me. He's like, tell me your name. He's like, I would never hurt you. And she said, Waverly. Now we go back and like, because Waverly remembers like a moment she had brought up earlier in the episode about like her and Willow, which I'll kind of get to in a second. But like she was basically on the ice. She fell in. She said Wynonna helped her. But Wynonna brought it up like, who's the one that saved you? Which the fact that she said that, Wynonna was like, no, like almost like Wynonna was like, I don't remember that. Like, are you sure? But it turns out like Waverly kind of remembers later on, and it turns out the person who had saved her was Bobo. So I wondered, did she not say anything because she didn't want to kind of upset Wynonna, or maybe she didn't remember that. Maybe she blocked it out and immediately thought it really was Wynonna, because back then she actually thought Bobo was simply just her imaginary friend, so she wouldn't have given it much thought. But once again, that's an event. It's like, and as he was saving her, he was like, I'll never hurt you. It's like, so some time thing went on there where like her words actually influenced him. So maybe on some level, he actually remembered her being like, on some level, like, he did keep remembering who he was, the man he was before. And maybe that's what strived him to basically do what he did, like work with Willa, trying to break this curse and everything. Maybe that's what ultimately led to him doing everything. So maybe Wynonna inadvertently ended up creating her. I don't know. But it does go, in retrospect, it's like he never ever once harmed Waverly. He did befriend her and stuff like that. But, he may have used her, but he never hurt her, so he was always kind to her. So it's like, I kind of have more context to that whole situation. But going back to what I was bringing up about Waverly, there's like so much in this episode to kind of dissect. For one, like Waverly kind of brought up an earlier memory. Basically, Willa threw her bunny rabbit on her doll on the ice. It was very thin ice, and Waverly ended up falling in. And it kind of stems back to the whole, Willa knew that's why she hated me so much. And it's like, in retrospect, there were things in season 1 where like Waverly was like, yeah, you told me to climb on this beam and stuff like that. I could have fallen and broken my neck. But what, like, Willa tried to act, very apologetic. But then the way she kind of treated Waverly sometimes, it wasn't the same way she treated Wynonna. And now it's like, now we understand why she was kind of bossy and basically very mean towards Waverly. It's because she knew the truth. And then it's like, well, now it makes sense. Like, no one ever really paid her much attention anytime she got good grades or did this or did that. Like, so in some ways you also see like Waverly became the person she is, the go-getter, the extraordinary person she is to get people's attention, because she was never really seen by her family. Her dad never really showed her too much love, and it's like, now it makes sense why, because I was possibly never his. It's like, but Wynonna's like, Mom called you Angel. It's like, yeah, but she left, didn't she? Which then that kind of makes me think that Waverly was in fact like their moms, but not their dads. So she isn't an Earp, but I think they, like her and Wynonna and Willa all have the same mom, just different dad. That's how I chalk it up. I mean, granted, what kind of might get you started thinking about a lot of this time. Now, this is a random thought I just had in my head. Because they brought it up before last episode, was like the whole like situation of like, oh, there was talk of a demon and a human having a baby. And immediately my brain goes, so I immediately was thinking like, could that have been Waverly in some shape or form? And it's like, well, what if that was the case? What if it was actually Bobo and her, like Waverly's mom, which would be super weird considering the fact that he fell in love with Willa. That's super weird and creepy in its own right. I don't know. That's just a whole weird thing to unpackage. But what if that was the case? You know, what if she is like part like Revenant and she doesn't know it, or she, you know, or maybe she's just not necessarily even just Revenant, just something else entirely. But I mean, we'll just kind of have to wait and see. But I mean, what was another kind of crazy thing about this episode is the fact is that Wynonna was dead for at least like 7 or so seconds. Not a very long time, but she was dead for a little while. And then she's like, "How you said I was dead, right?" You know. That shouldn't count, right? And at the end of the episode, we see Bobo rising up. It's like, dude, that's crazy. Because at the moment she was asking that, I was like, I don't even get that. Why would you even ask? And then Bobo rises up. I'm like, right. When the Earp heir dies, the Revenants come back. So that begs up the question, did all the Revenants she killed in season 1 come back? Or is it just Bobo? Was she dead long enough only for Bobo to kind of squeeze through the gates as everyone else still trapped? Which is crazy to think about. Bobo is back. And Bobo did help with the whole, like, keeping the whole widows sealed away and everything. He helped with that when he was Robert. So will he help them this time? I don't think he'd be all for helping Clutie escape and everything, which I think I completely forgot to mention. And that's what the seals represent and everything. They're the only things keeping Clutie from coming back. So, and the third seal is on Doc's hand. Granted, he doesn't, like... Well, no, Bobo does know that. He just never needed it, so he never bothered coming after it because it's like, well, it doesn't do me any good now because I'm already a Revenant. So, you know, that would have done me some good when I was a human and dying, but now, so he never really bothered with it. So it's like, but the thing is, will he join with them now that he's a Revenant now? Like, the question is, what will he do now? You know? I mean, obviously him and Wynonna are going to be at odds because, you know, she still did kill Willow, the woman he loved and everything, so... There's so much to unpackage there. It's like, dude, like I have no idea what he's going to do now that he's back. I mean, eventually Wynonna's going to have to put him down again. So, which kind of gets me thinking: is Rosita a demon or something? I mean, obviously, like her and the Earp girls don't necessarily bump heads again. I mean, obviously, there's the complication of like Doc being a baby daddy, but that's also, you know, as like Nicole and Waverly kind of talk about it, it's like that's her boyfriend. You know, Doc's her boyfriend and everything. So it does beg the question of like. I don't know, because she starts wanting, you know, because Doc is like, yeah, I want all of you to get together. You're, you know, important women in my both of the Earps are my friends and people I care about, but you too. I want you all to kind of, you know, I don't want this kind of like weirdness where it's like I have to choose who I hang out and around, you know, so she did try her best, which her and Waverly were bonding until the whole situation came, which you almost see almost a jealous look on Nicole's face that like Rosita's calling her a wave and everything. It's just like, oh, Rosie and everything. She's like, oh, you're drinking and having fun and getting all intimate with each other like that. It was almost like a little bit of jealousy, but also, but that ended up breaking the moment, you know, Nicole did what she did, hiding the results from Waverly, which is understandable. She's a girl. She, you know, that's her girlfriend. She loves her. She doesn't want her sad because it's like the moment you see this, there's no going back. It will change everything, you know, finding out the results of like what the situation is. And granted, we don't know what it is with, Waverly because she read the results, but we, as the audience, never got to find out. So I'm still leaning on that way. I've kind of felt like that might be the case, that their mom had an affair and Waverly was kind of the byproduct of it. So, which once again begs the question, where is their mom? That might be something that might not come up until like the very end of the season. I feel like her mom has come up more and more in conversation this season. So I'm curious, like, will anything come about that or not? We'll just kind of have to wait and see. But last time we saw Doc present day, he was going to basically visit Constance at the Salt Lake, which we know her whole condition, so. Which I kind of brought this up last season. I was curious whether she'd make kind of a return this season, which she kind of has in a past sense, but not like a present day sense. So I'm curious when anything can come about that. She's still missing her head and everything, but I don't know. maybe something will happen and kind of get her to come back to life. I mean, her body's still there, which, I mean, once again, we still need, going back to that, we still don't know what the hell Tucker's up to either. And what does this mean now that Warren Carlo is quote unquote dead? Like, I don't know if he's dead, and like he might pop up again. At least maybe he's out of commission for a while, but eventually pops up, or maybe he's dead. I don't know. The whole immortal thing. Maybe it's the type of thing where he has to die first and then he can just come back and be fine. I don't know. Because it's also setting up the whole thing about that order that exists here in Purgatory. Because Dawes was basically telling Ewing, the leader of it, like, yo, dude, you won't be able to stay neutral forever. You're thinking this is just Wynonna's fight? This is everybody's fight. It's like, we're here just to protect the Ghost River Triangle, but the fact of the matter is, this will be your problem soon enough if Cootie is brought back up. That's not just going to be an Earp situation. It's going to be an everybody's situation, you know, because that's going to cause some big trouble. I'm very curious to see, I mean, you know it's going to happen this season, but what would Cootie be like? We saw what Bobo was like as a demon, like what kind of powers. I mean, each Revenant, you know, certain ones has special abilities. Like one was kind of super fast, and Bobo had his own telekinetic thing. I was like, what would Cootie have? Because once again, we saw to a certain extent what Constance's children kind of were, but they were like that because of Cootie. So it's like, if that's what the children want, what is it about Cootie? Like, you know, does he even look human or not? And speaking of looking human, we saw Dawes kind of tapping more into his, I would assume, dragon powers, because they used their kind of, the Widows used their ice breath on him, but thinking about Wynonna and worried about her, he ended up kind of summoning more of it, and it kind of fought the frostbite back a little bit until you know, the power started leaving him and he started freezing over again. So like I said, a very good episode, and I'm super excited to see what next week's episode has in store for us. Especially, I almost like left the episode without really bringing it up, is the whole Wynonna baby situation, because it seems like she has even more like reservations for this whole situation, because the doctor is talking to her and everything, and Wynonna's kind of joking about it. It's like, you need to take this a little more seriously. It's probably like only a few more weeks before you give birth and everything. Do you have to start thinking about stuff like, you know, would adoption be a whole, you know, would that be a viable, I mean, it's always a viable option for you, which is something Wynonna has to think about. Would she get the baby up for adoption? Would she keep it? With her life and the way it is, would it be okay to keep a kid? Is it right to grow a kid up in this situation? I mean, her and her sisters grew up in this whole Earp situation. It's like, they had a very messed up childhood, a very traumatic messed up childhood, and it's like, would you really want to do that to a kid, or would a kid be better off not knowing them? But then again, it's like finding it, you know, there's a possibility your sister, you know, Waverly was adopted too, so it's like, would you really be right not letting a kid really know who their parents are, or knowing more about them, or who they really are, just leaving the child on their own, maybe never getting to know you? I mean, to be fair, it's a situation where it's like, Wynonna never really had the time to really 100% process everything, because let's not forget the whole time skip thing kind of pushed that out there for, I mean, she never really planned to tell anyone. She wanted to keep that a secret, but it was like, you know, the cat was out of the bag. So she never really had time to really process it, because the next thing she knows, boom, she's like ready to pop soon. So it's kind of like things she wasn't able to think about before, now she has to rush to think about them, and it's a lot, you know, to think about, you know, because she probably never thought about being a mother. Like, she probably never wanted to be one, and now she's going to be one. And it's a lot for her to handle, you know. I'm not going to assume that situation. Like, I do not envy her. It's a very tough situation, like, you know, considering all her circumstances. So I'm just very interested to see where her decision lies in that whole situation. Like I said, it's understandable, like, to be as reserved as she is. Like, obviously she cares for the baby. She's like, don't worry, she's talking to the baby and everything. But there's certain aspects to it, like the realization is still, it takes time. It seems like it comes and goes. Like, obviously there's a moment she's talking to baby where it's there, but then like the logistics of it and just like the realization of like, oh, this is happening kind of hits her sometimes. And it, you know, I would assume it's scary. Like, I wouldn't know what to do in that situation either. Like, I don't think I'd be a good parent. You know, I mean, and I'm sure a lot of people have had that thought, but I'm sure Wynonna thinks it more so than anyone else, kind of being who she is, kind of always kind of having that party lifestyle. And it's just like, but really that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.